At the age of 30, it seemed to me that I had long gone beyond those family misunderstandings and inequalities that had been formed over the years in my life, vaguely rooted somewhere in the past. All the more surprising was the call from the bank, which broke the morning silence of my apartment. I picked up the phone, unaware of anything unusual, and heard the dry voice of the operator asking questions about my loan application for as much as $150,000. The request was approved, only my signature was expected. Numb, I tried to explain to the bank employee that I had not submitted any application for a loan, but he persistently repeated, all that was needed was my consent, because the application had already been approved. After the conversation ended, I stared at the phone screen for several minutes, digesting what was happening. Thoughts were confused, fear was replaced by righteous anger. Someone decided to be bold, took out a huge loan in my name, without warning, without asking. It was like a stab in the back, but doubled in force from the unknown and from the suspicion that my own name had been used so unceremoniously. Later, after making several more calls, I finally found out exactly what had happened. It was my parents who took out a loan in my name to cover the costs of the wedding of Olivia, my younger sister. Memories immediately flooded back, full of long years of rivalry disguised as sisterly intimacy, which in fact was only a thin shell hiding her privileged position in the family. Olivia was only 25, and since childhood she had been pampered, turned a blind eye to any whim. How she managed to bring all the family resources to herself, squeezing out even the innermost forces and desires of our parents, I could only guess. She seemed to be trapped in her own world, and from a young age she seemed to be focused on receiving the most exceptional gifts. It seems that not a single whim of hers met with proper resistance. Even during our rare meetings, I saw that her upbringing turned out not to be gratitude, but a habit of demanding and receiving. My parents, despite the fact that they did not communicate with me often anymore, did not refuse her even such a large-scale favor. They didn't just lend her money, they put my name on the line without even notifying me. The events of recent months flashed through her mind. Olivia and her fiancé John, with whom she had been together for about a year, decided to get married. John, it seemed to me, was one of those people who knew how to count money, and I did not expect him to participate in the luxurious plans that my sister aspired to. But the wedding. For her, a wedding is something else, something grandiose and perhaps the only thing that could satisfy her demands for life. It turns out that they had already tried to convince John's parents to help them with finances, but were decisively refused. And so, after that, my own parents not only agreed, but also took out a large loan without thinking about the consequences. They defended her on the phone. It was amazing how easily they could find words of justification, as if handing out debts for me had become something completely ordinary. Olivia is your sister, they said, as if that phrase alone could calm my shock. At first, I couldn't believe what had happened. It seemed that my parents, with whom we rarely saw each other, decided that their desires could override all boundaries of reason, as if my life was just an additional line on their to-do list, an invisible background for the fulfillment of other people's dreams. And now, when I held in my hands the very documents with a forged signature that my father and mother did not hesitate to go to for the sake of family honor, rage and bitterness fought with despair. There was only one phrase to defend them: Olivia is your sister. But did blood ties give them the right to control my future? When my father found out about my intention to sue, he did not even try to justify himself. On the contrary, he attacked me with reproaches, reminding me that I simply had to support my sister and sacrifice my plans for this. You will only harm yourself and our family if you go against us. His voice sounded sharper than usual, as if he was no longer his own father, but just a man who saw in me a tool to achieve a goal. With cold determination, I broke off the conversation and made a final decision. My intention to file a lawsuit against my parents now seemed inevitable, because they had crossed not only the line of trust, but also all acceptable boundaries, putting me in the face of unjustified financial risk. The loan agreement delivered by the bank appeared to me as a frightening reminder of the future. Every line in the document made me shudder, the debt they had placed on my shoulders had to be repaid within 2 years. I read the terms over and over again. The slightest delay or error in payments, and the entire debt will require immediate coverage. And the most painful thing is that they knew about my plans to open my own business. I spent months building this future, contacting investors, preparing a project, all in order to create something of my own, to gain independence. I planned to quit my job and devote myself to a new business, but, of course, this would require time during which there would be no stable income. They knew that my path to a new venture was expensive and difficult, required time and effort, but decided that my dreams were nothing more than a whim. That day, at that moment, sitting alone with these documents, I realized for the first time how far my parents had become. When I decided to tell John the truth, I was overwhelmed by a strange feeling, a mixture of rage and liberation, as if I had finally crossed the invisible line between duty to my family and my own principles. I couldn't stay away any longer and felt the need to show the real picture of their life together, which would begin with cheating and debts. I typed in his Facebook profile, wrote a long message, choosing my words carefully. Every sentence was like a sharp point. It hurt not only him and my sister, but also me. I described how my parents hid the truth, forged my signature and put me at financial risk for the sake of wedding whims, not considering it necessary to ask my consent. Olivia and John deserved to know what kind of sacrifice their plans were based on. When the message was sent, I felt strangely satisfied. The truth about this situation, as if it had freed me from years of silence and patience, became available to everyone. After that, I went ahead and wrote the same message to several relatives and family friends, feeling that the truth should be told to everyone. Deep down, I knew that I might have crossed the line by revealing everything so abruptly and publicly. But what else could I do if, even after talking to my parents, they continued to protect Olivia as if she were an innocent victim in this terrible performance? The answers were not long in coming. My parents called almost immediately, showering me with reproaches and pleas, begging me to withdraw my words and try to hush up the situation. Mom turned into a storm of emotions, accusing me of destroying everything, that I dared to interfere in family affairs, and sowed turmoil that can no longer be hidden. It seemed that even my pain and betrayal were unimportant to her. Olivia, upon learning the truth, was shocked, not by the fact that her parents had allowed themselves to do this, but by the fact that their plan had failed, and now the costs of the wedding fell on her shoulders. She was angry at them, but more at me. She was furious, accusing me of ruining her dream of a wedding. Olivia even said that I should have discussed it with her and my parents before writing to John, that it was my fault that her life had turned like this now. I tried to understand her point of view. I realized that my actions had really caused chaos, but at the same time I was tormented by the question, could Olivia really not know about the loan? With each subsequent call, with each new claim that was showered on me from friends, relatives, and Olivia herself, doubt began to creep into my thoughts. I began to wonder if I had crossed an acceptable line by putting family affairs on public display and dragging John and his family into this endless confrontation. Olivia seemed to have lost all composure, accusing me of ruining her life, her wedding plans, making all her dreams vulnerable and fragile. She repeated that she didn't know about anything, that she was dragged into this scam without her knowledge, and now her world has collapsed because of my intervention. Confusion filled me. Was my decision to tell John hasty? Should I have tried to resolve this directly with my parents first, without causing such acute shame to our family? But whenever I started to think that I might have really gone too far, the anger returned, reminding me that my parents had put me in front of a terrible choice, forcing me to protect myself from people I trusted. Fortunately, the bank confirmed that they would launch a fraud investigation process, and assured me that for now I was relieved of the obligation to pay the loan. However, this did not bring peace of mind, and looking at the phone bursting with calls, I sighed, deciding to talk to John directly, perhaps to clarify everything personally. Meanwhile, my parents wouldn't let up, repeating that I had destroyed my family and deprived my sister of a chance at a happy life. A few days later, I managed to get through to John and explain my version of events. I told him that my parents had deceived me, using my name and financial future to sponsor his wedding to Olivia. Despite his restrained answers, I felt that their family took my words seriously. And then came the call from Olivia, and her accusations hurt more than I expected. "You trampled on my life," she said. "I didn't know anything about the loan. I didn't know they were using your name, but you ruined everything, and now there won't be a wedding." I listened to her words, trying to figure out if it was possible that she really wasn't aware that her parents had helped her so generously at my expense. There was real pain and disappointment in her voice, but still something bothered me. "Olivia," I interrupted her, "do you really want me to believe that I didn't know anything? That the parents came up with this plan themselves? Didn't you suspect for a moment how they found the money for your wedding?" But she continued to insist that she had no idea about the loan and that her trust had been betrayed. Doubt squeezed my heart, but I was not ready to back down. The next morning, the call from my mother sounded like an echo of the reproaches I've heard all my life. Her voice was broken and full of tears. There was pleading, pain, and that painful disappointment that I knew was directed exclusively at me. Her words streamed through the phone, and I listened with unexpected apathy as she begged me to reconsider my decision, to forget about the lawsuit, about revealing the truth, about anything that could tear us apart as a family. Mom said John broke off his engagement to Olivia. This news hit me like lightning, but I did not allow myself a single reaction, realizing that my mother was waiting for exactly this: regret, recognition of her mistake. I listened in silence, realizing that my sister had hidden this detail from me the day before, preferring to focus on the accusations without revealing the true consequences. My mother, without restraining her emotions, told me that Olivia blames me for everything, that her dreams were shattered, that her life was now, as she said, destroyed to the ground. Guilt tried to seep into my heart, but in its place was another, unexpected feeling: satisfaction. I felt satisfied that my parents, who had crossed over me so easily, were experiencing this humiliation and suffering. It was not malicious, it was not poisoned by revenge, but rather a sad statement that justice is still able to take its toll. But that feeling receded as soon as I heard my mother start talking about how I had destroyed her family, hurt everyone, and ruined Olivia's future. When she finally finished her speeches, I tried to stay as calm as possible and firmly told her that I was not going to apologize for the truth. I reminded her that they had cheated, forged documents, and taken the liberty of destroying my plans for the sake of Olivia's illusions. My speech was brief, but in every word there was a harsh rightness that my mother seemed unable to accept, and even hearing all this, she continued to repeat about preserving the family and that I had to close my eyes for the sake of peace. The week passed in a blur. I avoided communicating with my parents, but soon rumors began to spread around. Relatives intervened one by one, sometimes with support, sometimes with reproaches. Some, having learned the truth, quietly encouraged me, saying that my indignation was quite justified. But there were also those who, embarrassingly lowering their eyes, cautiously advised me not to take the trash out of the hut and to remember family honor. Meanwhile, Olivia has launched another mechanism, choosing the most modern way to do this: social media. She began posting emotional posts filled with discontent, resentment, and vague hints, which in the eyes of her friends, of course, could seem justified aggression against a traitor. She didn't name me directly, but in each of her posts I could guess the poisonous arrows aimed in my direction. I felt uneasy at how others perceived our family drama, not knowing all the details and motives, trying to guess who was right and who was to blame, based on scraps of information. The words of support coming from people who had no idea what had actually happened seemed fake and burdensome to me. They wrote that the breakup in the family was only a consequence of intransigence, that betrayal had apparently become part of our nature, and, not knowing how deep this wound was, they gave advice like spectators in the stands. I realized that I have no desire, much less the strength, to get involved in something like this. These arguments, fueled by Olivia's posts, were disgusting to me. I did not seek excuses in front of the public and did not want to turn pain into a cheap spectacle. A few days later, Olivia called me again. There was still a cold fury in her voice, but perhaps in these few days she had calmed down or just accepted the consequences of her actions. "The engagement is officially terminated," she said. "John is leaving, and his family has also completely severed contact with me." She said it monotonously, almost indifferently, as if she were uttering phrases that were not worth thinking about. Then she added that she would soon move out of the house that she planned to share with John and stay with a friend for a while. Her voice was devoid of emotion, as if this breakup was just a temporary setback. However, what she said afterwards really shocked me. Suddenly, as if with a sigh of relief, she confessed that she had known about the loan all along. This phrase sounded like a bolt from the blue, like a blow to an already wounded heart. I stared into the void in front of me, stunned. After all, after so many words that she was an innocent victim, and accusations that I ruined her life, it turns out she knew everything. She knew that my parents had issued a loan in my name, she knew that my fake signature was signed, but she thought that this would not be a problem. "I thought everything would be fine when the wedding was over," she added coldly. I asked her why she decided not to tell me anything, knowing that her plan was based on my creditworthiness and my name. She sighed and, without hiding her reproach, said that she was afraid to admit it, because it would jeopardize the whole wedding. "I didn't expect the bank to contact you directly," she added reproachfully, as if everything had happened through no fault of her own, but by an unfortunate coincidence. Her words awakened a mixture of disappointment and anger in me. She had planned to keep it all a secret, and now her anxiety was gone, because John was gone, and the truth no longer mattered. I tried to find some sincerity in her voice, but Olivia seemed annoyed and hurt, not because of the end of the relationship, but because her plan had collapsed. There was resentment in her voice, and she coldly called me a terrible and immature person, accusing me of letting her down. My patience has run out. Pulling myself together, I told her that I didn't owe her anything, that I wasn't going to feel guilty for destroying my illusions. I understood that in front of me was not the sister I once knew, but a selfish woman who was ready to step over everything for the sake of her happiness. At that moment, I finally realized how deeply our family relationship had decomposed. There was a black line of mistrust and misunderstanding between Olivia and me, and I realized that there was no turning back anymore. A feeling of lightness that I hadn't experienced in many years filled me, as if the weight that weighed on my soul had finally dissolved. For the first time, I allowed myself to admit that the family that should have supported and loved me had long since lost all genuine attitude towards me. In this strange release, I no longer had to worry about people who were indifferent to me. But the relief was fleeting, the consequences still hung in the air like a black cloud. My parents continued to insist that I drop the lawsuit, as if every call they made could shake my resolve. For weeks, I received calls from relatives, each of whom tried to talk to me like a child who was just being naughty, and to convince me that it was impossible to go against my parents. They preferred not to notice the obvious, as if fraud, forgery, and deception did not deserve punishment, and repeated in their speeches that the court was too cruel. I turned a deaf ear to their requests and focused on the case, maintaining regular contact with my lawyer. I gathered a dossier, as much evidence as possible against my parents, and the more I delved into the documents, the stronger my indignation became. It turned out that they not only forged my signature, but also distorted financial statements by presenting false data about my income to the bank. These discoveries seared me with a new fire of indignation, but at the same time inspired confidence that I was acting correctly. Fortunately, the bank sided with me and finally relieved me of responsibility for the loan. Meanwhile, the parents faced serious legal problems, and family conflicts escalated to the limit. Olivia moved in with friends, finally leaving the house that she and John dreamed of sharing as a married couple. She seemed to be in a hurricane of resentment and disappointment. She blamed me for her breakup with John and was angry at her parents for bringing the situation to such a nightmare. And then one day, When I was already used to this onslaught of accusations and discontent, I received a letter from Aunt Emily. She was the only one who stayed away and preferred neutrality. Throughout this time, she was silent, did not speak out either for or against, just watching everything that was happening. In her letter, she offered to meet for a cup of coffee. I wondered if I should accept her offer. I didn't want to listen to attempts to resolve the conflict at my expense again, but Emily was not a person inclined to incite hostility or take sides. In the end, I agreed. When we met, her face was calm, her gaze was soft but attentive. She asked about my current situation, and for the first time I could talk to someone who had no personal attachment to this case or ulterior motives. Emily listened to me with such attention that I felt her support seemed to strengthen my words and fill them with some new firmness. I had never before had the opportunity to speak out so that I could really be heard, and not half interrupted, persuading me to think about my family. Emily, sitting across from me over a cup of coffee, became the first person who didn't try to ease my pain or make me back down. Her question about how I see the outcome of all this, an apology, a payback, or something else took me by surprise, opening up new horizons for me to think about. Maybe I just want them to understand that they will never be able to treat me so lightly again, I replied slowly, feeling each phrase echo in the depths of my soul. My desire was not to destroy their lives, but to establish my place once and for all, to make it clear that my name and my plans are not toys that can be sacrificed for the whims of others. Emily nodded, saying softly, I completely understand this feeling, but I'm afraid your parents see things differently. For them, you become the source of all their troubles, because your refusal to obey revealed what they may have hidden even from themselves. Her words burned me. I really felt that my parents had always considered me a troublemaker, but this was the first time someone had said it out loud. We both knew that even if I didn't go all the way and demand an answer from them, they were unlikely to change their views on me. I will have to live with the fact that they have always seen my decisions as a threat, not the right to defend their own independence. Emily hugged me, adding firmly, Stay strong. You haven't done anything wrong. This whole situation has shown that you are ready to be honest and sincere, even if it will be painful. After her words, I sat in thought, realizing that this conversation had revealed a new truth in me. I didn't want revenge. I needed a sense of freedom, the final breaking of the chains that had bound me to my family's expectations for so long. But knowing that my parents would never admit their mistakes weighed on me. Returning home, I felt Emily's words echo in my head, as if small but heavy stones were falling into the pond of my soul, leaving behind waves of reflections. I knew that by continuing to fight for my truth, I might be putting even more strain on my family, but I had no other way to get free. I'd been thinking about the proposal for several days, unable to make a decision right away. I weighed every aspect, both financial benefits and an inner sense of justice, which required much more than just compensation. The call from my lawyer informing me of the out-of-court settlement offer seemed like a lifeline in the storm I was floundering in all this time. My parents were willing to pay a significant amount in exchange for dropping the lawsuit, and although this offer beckoned with its simplicity and the opportunity to avoid long court arguments, an inner voice doubted, does this mean that I'm just letting them go without real consequences? Together with the lawyer, we have thoroughly studied the proposed conditions. The compensation was significant. It could not only ease my present, but also help with financial independence in the future, allowing me to plunge headlong into my business, not burdened with worries about money. This amount could be what would ensure freedom from the financial pressures that have always oppressed me. But deep down, I knew that money would not be able to rebuild those destroyed bridges that I would never cross again. I was afraid that by accepting their offer, I would let my parents think that everything was forgiven and forgotten, that just a check with a number would compensate for betrayal and pain. However, in the end, I decided to agree to a settlement, because I realized that this form of justice, albeit a compromise one, would give me a chance to finally move forward. When all the papers were signed and the lawsuit was closed, I felt a heavy weight fall off my shoulders. I no longer had to fight for my right to respect. I no longer had to prove my position. The parents, of course, will still face charges from the bank, so the consequences of their actions are not over yet. However, for me it was a completed stage. This choice, however, completely changed our relationship. The family holidays that we used to spend together are a thing of the past. We no longer gathered in the same house, and any conversations were just a formality, a faded shadow of the old intimacy. We became, in fact, strangers, connected only by blood and distant memories, which now seemed alien and distant. Everything was completed. Compensation gave me the opportunity to start my business from scratch, not overshadowed by economic fears. Weeks had passed since the agreement, but the memories of that time still remained on the surface, like footprints on the water, distorting my reflection in the present. I tried to work, immersing myself in the development of my new business, but the shadow of what happened firmly settled in my thoughts. It seemed that I had lost more than just trust. My sister, my parents, those who were part of my world were now alive only in memories, like ghosts lost forever. I didn't try to contact them, realizing that they were unlikely to make the first move. We were strangers now. One evening, as I was sitting at my new desk sorting through documents, I received an unexpected letter from Aunt Emily. In simple but warm words, she asked about my well-being, as if she intuitively felt that I needed support. Her message sent a slight shiver through me, not from excitement, but from some long-forgotten feeling of intimacy. Her words, though simple, deeply affected me. I know it was difficult, but don't carry everything yourself. It was as if she knew how isolated I was now, having lost not only my family, but also a sense of connection with the world, with people who, perhaps, could be nearby. As if under the influence of an inexplicable force, I decided not to carry this burden alone anymore. A few days later, Emily and I met again in the same cozy cafe where we first discussed my experiences. This time I felt a little calmer and more confident. She looked at me with a warmth and understanding that required no explanation, and began to speak in a soft voice. "Family is not just about blood ties," she said, touching on the topic of settlement and my conflicting feelings. I nodded, feeling her words penetrate to the very depths of my soul. "You can choose your own family," she added, and these words sounded like a revelation. Emily has opened up the possibility for me not to cling to the past, not to hold on to those who have long ceased to be close. She talked about freedom from expectations, which for years, invisibly for me, dictated my aspirations and actions. This realization felt like liberation, but also like loss. I suddenly saw how many years of my life I had spent trying to earn my parents' approval, as if that was my only value. Emily reminded me that despite the pain caused by my parents and sister, I don't have to remain their prisoner. Thanks to her support, I began to realize that I could live without looking back at those who destroyed my hopes and attachments. It wasn't easy. I couldn't just erase all the memories that seemed to be fused with my being. But, as she said, it was possible, and in this discovery lay my new strength. At that moment, I realized that a life was opening up in front of me, in which I no longer depended on anyone's expectations except my own. It was a difficult path, and the steps were not easy, but I knew that from now on I would no longer cling to the past and look for attachments where they had not been for a long time. A few weeks have passed, and I have invested all of myself in a new business. The settlement funds helped me build a solid foundation. I hired several employees who shared my enthusiasm and vision, and I was finally able to focus on what brought me real satisfaction. Work became a breath of fresh air for me, a new source of inspiration, and every day, returning home, I felt hope for the future accumulating, gradually displacing the long-standing shadows of the past. But one evening, when I was returning home after a particularly busy day, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was painfully familiar to me. It was Olivia. I hadn't spoken to my sister since her engagement was broken off, and hearing her even, almost detached tone, I felt a wave of embarrassment. She began the conversation calmly, as if she was choosing her words carefully. "I just found out that our parents are selling the house," she said. Her voice sounded gloomy, as if the words were difficult for her. I thought you should know what's going on too. Our parents are in debt. They've run out of money. Every word she said was like a bolt from the blue, and I stood in a daze, not knowing what to answer. She continued, they lost everything because of what happened to you. Her phrase left me speechless for a moment. My first reaction was a mixture of confusion and some vague guilt, but another realization quickly returned. It was the result of their own actions, and I am not responsible for their financial collapse. Olivia added, almost in a whisper, our parents brought this on themselves with their fraud. There was a bitter undertone in her words, either regret, or even awareness of the futility of her attempts to protect her parents, as she always did. I didn't know what she wanted to hear from me in response. She was staying with a friend, and judging by her tone, the relationship there also began to deteriorate. Is she looking for my sympathy? My support? The seconds dragged on, and finally I found the strength to answer in an even tone. Olivia, I understand that the situation is difficult, but it was their choice. They misled not only me, but also the bank and everyone around. For a moment, I sensed a subtle tension in her voice, but she quickly asked, but what did they really want? They were just trying to help me. I felt that her words might be an attempt to find an excuse for what had happened. I knew I didn't want to get bogged down in endless arguments about who was right and who was wrong again, and I quietly added, they wanted to do what they thought was right, but that doesn't mean it was the right thing to do. Olivia fell silent, and I couldn't tell if she was looking for my understanding or my forgiveness. Olivia's words, her surprisingly soft and confused tone, made me think about her in a completely different way. This was no longer the confident, spoiled younger sister I was used to seeing, but someone new, a person standing on the verge of understanding and anxiety, trying to find himself in an environment that was collapsing. I knew that a lot depended on this conversation for her, but I also realized that I had nothing more to offer. I felt myself cautiously, with a barely discernible echo, advising her what I had realized only recently, Olivia, maybe it's time to go my own way. After a long pause, she finally replied softly, yes, that's probably it. This answer, simple, almost elusive, sounded like the first step on her own path, and we ended the conversation, leaving each in her own space. I didn't fully understand what I was feeling then, relief, sadness, or some vague sense of farewell. A few weeks later, I found out that my parents had sold the house and moved into a smaller apartment. This news came unexpectedly calmly, as if leaving me almost indifferent. I didn't feel the need or the inner urge to somehow interfere in their lives or help solve their financial problems. Those dreams of parental approval that I thought were part of my nature suddenly lost their meaning. For the first time in my life, I felt true freedom that did not depend on someone's opinion, on the need to conform or receive praise. I didn't have to try to earn their love or attention anymore. I let go of that desire. This money, which seemed destined to become a burden and an eternal reminder of the family drama, I turned into the foundation for creating my own business. Every day was filled with a new meaning, and I discovered a confidence in myself that I had not known before. I was not just a part of someone's plans, not someone's reflection, not someone who gets lost among other people's expectations. Now I felt that I had my own dignity and a value that no one else could take away. My path forward seemed unexplored, full of challenges, but I accepted it with an open heart. I was moving forward, starting to live to the fullest, and despite all the losses and breaks, for the first time I felt that this was my own path, which I would determine myself.